I think America would be very wise to avoid giving African Americans more reparations because this would go very badly and it would make the nation more fragmented and more divided. Now, there are three reasons why I hold to reparations being a very bad idea, and I will give one at a time to make my case. The first reason is that the legal principles to substantiate reparations is lacking. Now, one would have to establish a contract to make it the case that slaves are owed compensation. One can see very clearly that a contract cannot be formed between a slaveholder and a slave. But even if, for the sake of argument, the contract was formed, under the law, it cannot be enforced because, according to ex post facto laws, laws that were once legal but now considered crimes cannot be enforced by courts. And since slavery is a crime, slavery will not be enforced by the courts. Any sort of arrangement that happened out of the institution of slavery cannot be enforced by the courts. So even under that circumstance, it's very, very hard to establish a legal theory of reparations for descendants of slaves. The second would be financial compensation. Now, when one sees the claim for reparations, it's very clear that the reparation advocates would have to hold that the descendants of slaves are owed reparations because the slaves were used as chattel, as property, and were exploited of their labor. And they should have been compensated, but weren't. And therefore, the remedy has to be that financial compensation has to be given. However, when one hears the term exploitation of labor, they should immediately think that you're dealing with Marxists or socialists. And under Marx's theory, workers should be paid more than just wages. They should be paid the surplus value that they put in the pockets of their employers. And so Marx would say that don't go just for the wages that you're owed. Go for also the surplus value, the profits that the capitalist makes out of your labor. And quite obviously, they would probably sensibly think about this and go to the legislatures and say, well, we want more than just the wages of a worker at the time. You also want the surplus value. And given America being a capitalist, individualistic society, it would not play into Marxist socialist ideas, and the proposal wouldn't be entertained. And there would be a tug of war as to what the amount would actually be. And so ultimately, the legislator would give an arbitrary amount to determine the case so then it can be settled. One has to ask immediately, is that justice? Because the amount was decided arbitrarily, and we don't know whether or not we're doing right by the slaves who dealt with the institution of slavery for being exploited. So financial compensation would be so hard to pin down that it would make reparations to be a very difficult affair to settle. And then third is that reparations has already been given. So when one thinks about it, one would have to imagine that financial compensation isn't even the appropriate remedy. When we look at the injury of the slaves, they were not afforded the opportunities to be what they wanted to be in society. Instead of being a lawyer, a doctor, a scientist, they were consigned to slavery. Therefore, the remedy would have to be that their descendants are open up new opportunities to be what they want to be, since they have to deal with the consequences of slavery, racism, discrimination, or what have you. And when one sees this remedy, one can see that it's already been given. Affirmative action of DEI serve as examples of how this remedy has been distributed to African Americans and people of color who've dealt with racism and discrimination. Now, I think that America should be very wise and consider the fact that we've already done this. Why should we have to give even more compensation to African American descendants of slaves? And when they do this, they find very clearly that the reparations argument falls apart. Now, I think that African Americans want to make money off of this proposal. And it's, in the end of the day, for their benefit, for their pockets. And they often say that they will use the money and build it for industries and make businesses so then they can compete with white America. But I think a very accurate portrayal of what would actually happen is Dave Chappelle's episode that was show back in the early 2000s of Black people getting reparations, spending it on themselves, spending it on perishable items, becoming poorer than they were before. And I think that's certainly what will happen. At the end of the day, I think we have to settle to the fact that reparations has already been given, that giving African Americans more reparations is wrong and is insulting to the taxpayers who work very hard to ensure that we can have a stable society, a thriving society, a flourishing society. And legislators, if they have any backbone, should never entertain this argument. They should turn away from a lot of these proposals and focus on issues that truly impact their constituents and impact America as a whole. And I think Blacks have to sit down and figure out how to solve their problems instead of asking for money, asking for resources, knowing that they themselves do not have the skills necessary to build those industries, to do things they wish to do, have the humility to understand their faults, their shortcomings, and work on. But until then, we will always have problems.